I think today, I know many people are thinking, oh, that's not a science talk. Oh, ha, ha. In our site visit, we were asked repeatedly as a center, what are we going to do with the data that comes from the experiments as well as the simulations? Now, I know I can speak for myself. We do make our programs available through GitHub, and we give an example whenever we publish a paper. But, the dream is to have, not only, the whole simulations of the entire cell and, and they could even go over a couple of days. We're talking gigabytes of data that will be available. And so we have certain rights as faculty here to have storage free for us. Never knew that until I think you made the mistake of telling me. And I'll introduce the speaker in just a moment. But also Bill Gropp, as you know, is the head of NCSA, and he's also the faculty member in the STC. So when I talk to him, well, maybe we should have somebody just come over and talk about data storage and make it as lively as possible. And then also about Clouder, that how can you manipulate the data a bit easier. So I would say, again, if I reflect on my own work, it would be nice to have all the data that is available or was used to make a particular plot in a paper. I think we should be able to get there pretty soon. Now, unfortunately, I don't see Ashwin. Can somebody give him a call? He was just out there. So I want to say also next week there will be a speaker from our STC. It's the postdoc Zeth Kendall, and he'll be talking about the progress that they've made on developing further this label-free IR AFM imaging. And so the introduction will be given by Ashwin, also a student in Rohit Bhargava's lab. So I'm hoping that the attendance will be much better, because when I gave my talk there, I think the room was filled. Barb was even saying, oh, maybe we need to move to another room. And I told her, just wait. We'll see how it settles down. But in general, we do want to have, and I thank all the faculty advisors who I see here. And I think we'll see if they're on Zoom, the other folks, and particularly the students, and be sure that they know they have to attend here, because the other thing that just happened recently, I was asked by the NSF to give a part of the webinar to a group of 500 people, all wanting to apply for the next STC competition, which will start soon. And one of the questions that was asked, how do you decide who stays in and who leaves? And one of the people who developed the NSF hired to do the strategic plan, and I think all of us faculty remember that wonderful visit. We had, thank heavens, a 5-year plan in our paper, in our proposal, so it wasn't that much problem, but it was trying to really get people together to understand where are we going, what are the goals. But they made a point about how do you measure participation, and one thing is about attendance. Oh, hiya, Ashwin. So that's the student who will give the talk at the beginning of the next lecture, and he'll make it crystal clear in 1 or 2 slides what Seth is going to tell us about. And I have absolute faith in this guy because he gave a beautiful talk in Italy. So I think it'll be a really nice thing. But they said, one should really start being more systematic and make it transparent how we're judging, the participation in the center. Okay, so now back to the good news. And I said the good news was NSF asked, and the site visit committee had asked, how are we handling the data? We answered, oh, we're going to use Clouder, or we're going to use storage at NCSA, because I had asked Bill Gropp what I could say. And now we want to learn how to do that. And I don't know if many of you do any type of machine learning, but we've been, again, Bill was able to, I think, get about $25 million more grant from the NSF, and he spent it all on grasshoppers, the newest GPUs from NVIDIA that have an ARM processor in it. And it gives you a speed up without having to change your code much. But if you use multiple GPUs in your simulations, it's wonderful. The talk between them and the CPUs is fantastic. And like already moving part of our code, not to the Grace Hoppers yet, we're just testing that, but even just having everything on the GPU, we see now we can do replication of the genome of the bacteria within about 7 hours. And that's truly incredible. And to do it at more physiological correct time, maybe it doubles that time, but we have plans to make use of it immediately. And you do get enormous speed up if you do multi-GPU processing. So I asked our today's speaker if he could also talk a little bit about storage, also if you're coming off of Delta or if you're coming off of the Delta AI machine. And first, just to let you know who's giving us the inside information here, he is the lead storage engineer at NCSA. Bill told me to contact him, Bill Groff. I did. I was so blown away about how straightforward he was. So it says here, in addition to managing the storage and enabling technology group, he supports many different high performance endeavors by doing the usual, solving the challenges to get the file system and the architect and exploit the architecture and the hardware configuration. And you do have a bachelor's degree in technical systems management and a master's degree in management information. They're both from the University of Illinois. I don't have down, what department was that?
So ACES did the bachelor's, and then master's was actually out of University of Illinois Springfield, but I'm not sure the department, to be honest with you.
Yeah, like if you ask now, did you get your degree in computer science? You may not know how to answer that since they're just changing their name from, our CS department is now going to be known as the CS, the Computer and Data Science Department, because they're putting so much stress and emphasis on data management. So without any further ado, we'll have JD start the lecture. He'll lecture about half the time, maybe a little more. And then our next speaker was supposed to be Kenton McHenry. He's the Associate Director of Software, but he wasn't in town, so they had his research software engineer, who was sort of instrumental in forming Clouder, will talk to us, but we'll have to do it via Zoom because I guess he's never in Champaign, Urbana, Illinois. I guess it's like a lot of the NVIDIA engineers. The whole head of their software engineering is sitting on a mountaintop in Switzerland. Lucky guy. And that's why NVIDIA has such good communications information for services. So without any further ado, JD, can you give us the latest information on data storage at NCSA?
Thanks for having us in. Luigi is up in Chicago. He'll speak for himself. He actually just moved to Chicago about a month or 2 months ago.
That's right. Hi, everyone.
Hi, I'll introduce you later.
So I do appreciate Zan inviting us here. While she's obviously, as you heard, grateful for us to come and present, we're obviously honestly grateful for you guys to have us here. Been on campus doing this stuff for 9 or 10 years, and I feel like as much as we put stuff out there and relay to people like, hey, the service is available, it doesn't even cost you your grant any money. It's still hard with the thousands of us that are on this campus to get that information out. It's really challenging. So we really appreciate you guys having us here to talk, and hopefully what you found here today is useful, and you can tell your colleagues who aren't here about it, and hopefully it just continues to ripple across campus. That's part of our goal here. Here we go. So my brief agenda here is I'm going to give a high-level overview of this, what we're kind of calling the Illinois Research Data Platform. I'm going to kind of give an overview of a couple of our systems here that underpin that, and then we'll have some time for questions and discussion. We can kind of put some of the Delta AI and Delta stuff that we were talking about there into that discussion period there at the end. So our goals and objectives when we were developing as we are developing, this is a continual process. The Illinois Research Data Platform is, we want to provide researchers such as yourselves and others with an end-to-end data storage system that can hold data throughout its life cycle. There's 4 phases there that I've listed that we're going to kind of briefly drill into next, because we want to empower researchers like yourselves to effectively manage their data as it transitions between these states. And then we also want to promote just in general an environment that fosters good data stewardship across the campus. Data is a lot of times the output of our research, right? You can spend years and years of your time, or collectively years and years of your time, and a lot of it gets distilled down into like 4 gigabytes of data at the end. It's like, this is the output of what we've done, right? And so we want to make sure that data is well cared for and shared within not just in our community, but around the country as we work with
And JD, I'm right in that it's both experimental data, because I know we talked a little bit about that, but there's also computational data.
Correct. Yes, absolutely. Yep. So yeah, so I'm an engineer by trade. My most recent chemistry that I've gone through, we actually had a site visit with an industry partner, and CSA also consults out with like Fortune 500 companies. And we were at one that was chemistry oriented about a month ago, and I got to see molecular model diagrams for the first time since high school chemistry for me. And so I'm recently brushed up, not really, but yeah, so that's seminary chemistry. But yeah, so in this research data lifecycle, there's these 4 main phases I just showed, and we'll dive into each of them. And they have varying needs with respect to data access methods, performance, and cost. But it's important for us to plan for the data throughout its entire lifecycle. And some of these phases we'll kind of show you, but there aren't separate solutions that we've engineered for each of these phases of the research data lifecycle. Some of them can overlap with each other. We'll kind of go through them here. That first phase is data acquisition. Just talking to Zan about some very interesting microscopes that are now coming online or are online at IGB. Which is actually where I started when I worked at the university. I was under Glenn Freed. I was not under there. I was in CNRG over there, and I supported Glenn and Shiv at the time. But yeah, so data acquisition is this first phase. Microscopes. A lot of the crop sciences people fly drones over cornfields and gather data. There's cameras, lab instruments, anything that generates data. There's untold numbers of things that everyone is working with that generates data. Also, data can be acquired externally. We're not operating satellites, but our astronomy department is gathering data from NASA data access centers regularly and doing work with that. But there's also community repositories for certain data sets that are very popular, and there's sometimes need to bring that data local to our campus to work on it or for it to facilitate projects that we're all working on. So data acquisition is very important in that first phase of data lifecycle. And so we want to, with Illinois Research Data Platform, make it easy for this to be ingested into our systems. So providing our central storage system to be mounted out on workstations and labs that have microscopes or other high-powered instruments attached, or providing data transfer nodes that have a lot of data transfer tools. So if you need to programmatically download data from like another facility or some other institution, you can quickly download data sets from external or push them external if maybe you have an allocation on a compute resource somewhere at the federal level, like at Oak Ridge or NERSC or somewhere like that. You can get your data out to those places as well. So data acquisition and sharing is kind of like the first step as we bring in this raw data. And then from there,
just one thing. So since you mentioned IGB, one of the instruments, microscopes we use a lot of there is the MinFlux one. And so how is it like it would be connected to the data storage? Because I know one of the interesting things we discussed was you can have it stored, and then there's another place to store it when you want to have it be publicly available. There's another place to store it if you just want it available to your research group or to say a work cluster within the STC.
I'll get to that.
Okay.
We're coming towards it. But yeah, IGB, like a lot of other institutions like Beckman and other facilities, we all sit on what's called the Carney network. If you guys are familiar with that term, it's the Campus Accelerated Research Network Environment. I think I got the acronym right. But Carney is like this high-speed fiber optic internet connection. It's right now 100 gigabits per second, and in many places multi-100 gig. IGB is on that connection path. We sit on that connection path as well. So that's facilitates a lot of these large transfers if there's data that sits in IGB or data that sits in Beckman. I know maybe not you guys, but there's a lot of instruments I hear about in this building sometimes. They can all be highly connected to our file systems, then CSA and vice versa via that Carney network. And once that data is acquired, it moves into normally this analysis phase where you're computing on it. And in this phase, storage needs to be extremely fast because analysis is very heavy. A lot of cases, you're manipulating data, you're doing a lot of stuff with that data to try and make it into a product that is useful for science. But this needs to be accessible on all the compute platforms that you might want access to. A lot of what we do within the Illinois Research Data Platform is trying to bring the storage to where compute is happening, because while we might all like to think at NCSA that this computation happens on big supercomputers, for a lot of researchers, that actually happens in something on a workstation in their office. And so, though as GPUs get hotter and hotter, offices aren't tolerating that much anymore. But historically, there's these closets of workstations somewhere, and our goal is to, while we'd like, in campus IT and maybe facilities and services as runs power and HVAC, we'd like those workstations to come out of offices. That's a reality on this campus and every other campus across the country, it seems. So we want to make sure that we can bring storage, the data to those compute platforms as well. And this means that you don't have to move your data once it is landed on the system. Our whole goal with a lot of this is not, trying to reduce the amount of times as a reacher, their data is here, we have to copy it to here, you have to copy it to there. So every time you copy data back and forth, you have to track. Did I delete it there? I can delete that here, I have it over here. Oh wait, I don't have it over here like I thought I did, is it over here? Those types of things can happen. And so trying to get it so the data is in one place and it is available to you wherever your compute sits, or as best as we can possibly do it, is helpful, because then researchers don't have to do as much data movement on their data and spend as much time trying to track where data sets live and where they don't live, things like that.
And this is fast availability to some types of data. I know you had Granite up there,
Yes.
which is to me is like the
Granite will be
Bank of
different.
England.
Yeah,
No.
so yeah, it'll be different non-Granite, but yeah, Taiga's main goal is to be available in all those places. We do caveat also with researchers, especially maybe not as much in Beckman and other places, but like when we work with the ACES folks who maybe they have a workstation at the South Farms, the campus network to the South Farms in some places is just not awesome, to be quite frank. It's strung along a telephone pole, past some cows somewhere, and it lands in the shed. And so their network connection to our file systems may not be as fast, but we do try and make it be as fast as possible. It's usually ended up being limited by the network within the building when it comes to a workstation. But within our data centers, you'll see here in a moment, much faster connections there as well. So once we move out of that computational path, next the data comes moving into the accessibility phase. You've created data products, you've created things that you want to share with others and disseminate. This is a very important level of things. Sometimes you're sharing that data like Zan was saying, sometimes you want to share that wide open with the community, the world at large. Sometimes that sharing is just within research teams across the university, or maybe even within just a single lab group within the University of Illinois. And so even for all those varying levels, we want to make data accessibility easy and make it easy for people to share data in all of these different ways via multiple tools. And so our goal is to make this as easy as possible. And this phase is also getting a lot more attention. You guys are all very active in grants and things. NIH has been leading this a lot, but also NSF and others picking it up. They're placing these amazing requirements on keep this data available for 10 years after your grant, so for reproducibility reasons. Now, ignore the fact that they don't give any budget allocation to make that data available for those 10 years, but that's not their problem, apparently. It's just our problem as a university. But yeah, that's getting a lot more attention. We're seeing it a lot more now. It comes up in a lot of working talks within research IT professionals that we're in across the country with other R1 institutions. We're seeing a lot more agencies for data reproducibility reasons want to see people keep data around, and that can just get tricky on grants where if a grant ends and they just don't have any budget left to spend for that. So we're trying to find ways to help facilitate that as well, which we'll kind of touch on here. With this next phase of data archiving, at some point data sets are useful, but they're not accessed on a regular basis. So we want to keep them around, but maybe it's just for those funding agency requirements like we just said. But maybe, it's like that data set is accessed by people, but maybe it's only accessed, once a month by somebody as opposed to being accessed every day or every week. So this phase is still important. There's the concept of FAIR. You might have heard that, might have been in some grant proposals you've been working on. The FAIR principles for accessing data. I can't remember the acronym, but it defines essentially how data needs to be accessible for researchers across the country. It's a very open standard that NSF especially likes to cling to. The performance requirements, though, in these archiving phase is fairly low. We want to make sure the data is accessible. There's an emphasis on it's being stored as cheaply as possible. We also want to work with researchers here at this phase to properly, catalog the data, mint DOIs if they aren't already minted, and that's important in that phase for sure. And Luigi can talk about DOIs. I know his group works with helping researchers mint DOIs on things. But the whole goal of this is to, empower researchers to get what they need out of their data systems. And we want to provide not just hardware infrastructure or things like that. We also want to kind of foster communications. And this whole meeting is part of this. The slide deck was kind of adapted from something that wasn't researcher focused. And that came up, but this kind of conversation is very critical for us. We want to make sure that we have this dialogue with you all when it comes to your needs for data storage and data access. Part of this talk is me giving you information, but I'm hoping in the question and answer, I get a chance to hear from you all a little bit about challenges or things that you face or your thoughts, because it's really honestly refreshing for us to get a chance to talk to researchers and hear what they need, what they're doing. Because A, it's kind of cool just in general, and B, It helps us better create things when we're not in a vacuum in our office and we're designing something pretty well. So this is a whole level diagram of what we picture as the Illinois Research Data Platform. It didn't turn out too bad on this projector. It's hit or miss whether the resolution is good enough sometimes for the text. But at the center of our data research platform is a system called Taiga, which is our current active data storage platform. And then Granite, as Zan mentioned earlier, too, is our current research archive system. And we kind of have these protocols in place that flow data between these two systems and out to other people. Our big thing that we're working on right now is expanding kind of that top row. It used to be this data was available to batch compute, and we added high throughput compute for things like Condor and other schedulers. NCSA operates a cloud service named Radiant, which people can spin up virtual machines and spin them down. And we want to make the data available to them in their virtual machines now. There's also now a Jupyter Notebook service called Illinois Research Compute Notebooks. And then also things like virtual desktop interfaces and stuff like that are also coming for ways and different compute environments for researchers to have at their disposal. Some people like to work in Jupyter Notebooks. Some people are very perfectly comfortable with batch computing. And we're trying to accommodate all those different ways for people to interface with their data at the top there.
Can I ask a quick question about the Jupyter Notebooks?
Sure.
So one always sees problems of getting, what are the dependencies and what number, you used to think everything's grand if you're Python 3.7, no, you need 3.9 or 3.10, some things don't work. How do you communicate that to the
Sure, yeah,
users?
there's multiple flavors of notebooks that can be spun up in Jupyter Notebooks. And so there is some deprecation life cycle right now. And our Jupyter Notebook environment is new enough at this point, like about a year old at this point, where the deprecation horizon, Python has gotten better at that, I would say. Than it was like, I remember I was around for the 2.x to 3.x transition. Some of you also might have been for that transition. It was a good time for a lot of people. Sarcasm. But yeah, we work with researchers on that. There's a very published time frame for how notebooks go into play. So, but people can still bring their own notebooks to that system as well. So Taiga, our big core active data file system, is NCSA's global file system. It's interconnected to all our compute resources. Campus Cluster. If many people use Campus Cluster, anybody here use Campus Cluster for anything for research implementation yet? Got some nods from the side. So that cluster is currently in ACB, which is like 2, 3, 4 blocks that way. In January here, it's slated to move over to the petascale facility, and at that point, it will begin leveraging Taiga. Is the plan. And so also Taiga is not available. I don't think this concerns most of you, but NCSA also operates healthcare enclave for like EPHI data or QE related data sets. And just due to the nature of restrictions and audit and other compliance reasons, we can't make Taiga available in there. It kind of has its own version of Taiga, but it's just within that environment. Taiga is based on an open file system called Lustre. Just if you're technical and you want to look at things, I put it in there for you. Currently, Taiga is 19 petabytes in size. We're actually working through a 6 petabyte expansion right now. I had meetings earlier today. We're getting POs put together for that. Our hope is that we bring that 6 petabytes extra online in December to facilitate that move of Campus Cluster into there. Taiga is currently a hybrid NVMe and hard drive based system with a current throughput of 110 gigabytes a second. It is big B bytes, not little b bits. And we're expected that to jump to 150 here as we expand Taiga here in the future. I also put this diagram out there. It's more of a block diagram. Essentially shows how Taiga connects into Delta AI. Magnus is an industry system for a partner that we operate with. Campus Cluster will be there, our Radiant infrastructure, and other things. And so our export nodes up there and our DTNs in that upper right corner are the machines that we use to interface Taiga out to campus for things like NFS and Samba and other things like that. And actually also S3 now, we have S3 connectivity. We're actually doing some S3 testing right now with the Prairie Research Institute. So yeah, so right now, this is what got Zan's attention, I think, in our meeting, maybe because I mentioned the word free, and that goes a long way, I think. And so right now, 5 terabytes of capacity is available to all researchers via Illinois Computes. So, and I'm going to focus here on the wording of the researchers. I think is everybody in this room. I don't think well, maybe not you, Barb. I'm sorry. Everybody else, okay, not you. Our researchers, 5 terabytes per each of you. However, storage allocations for non-PI. So if you are not a PI yourself, it is a child allocation of the PI. So if Zan applies and she gets 5 terabytes, and then if you're underneath Zan in her group, and you apply, her quota will just go from 5 to 10 terabytes, and you guys will share that double quota. So this does help PIs who have a lot of people underneath of them. I told Bill Gropp about this and he was like, that's fine. I'm like, okay, I'll let you deal with that. If, you know, the PI with one grad student comes complaining, but yeah, so that's kind of how that works. That middle bullet though is very important. There's some other things that are going on. I was on a call earlier this morning. Unlimited Google Drive on campus is ending. If you didn't know that, sorry to be the bad news bearer for you. And so there's active work to get that pared down. So if you have a lot of data in there, actually, I'll do my good work for the day and tell you to start migrating that out. It's not going to go away. It's not going to go to zero. I think that the quota is going to be like 20 gigabytes or something like that. Tech Services is working on that. But a big part of Google Drive, what makes it hard to unwind that is you might put like a folder in Google Drive and then you like share that with your colleagues. And then, you know, when you graduate or move on and get an awesome job somewhere, the data might still be owned by you on Google Drive and people might still be using that shared folder you created to do their work years later. But then if they just offboarded your account when you left and deleted the data that was owned by you, all of a sudden your lab group that remains behind is like, what the heck? And so that's this reason for kind of tying storage underneath the PI. There's fewer PIs on campus than there are non-PIs, just by the nature of how this whole thing works. And it's easier to track when a PI either retires or moves to another institution or things like that or comes in. And so that's kind of where this ownership is to hopefully kind of prevent what we being Tech Services, which we're not part of, but what they saw is how things worked in Google Drive. And so we're trying to make sure that data ownership within the system kind of falls underneath that general.
Can I ask questions now?
Yeah. Anyway.
So what's the procedure for determine who is a
PI
child? Or
yeah, that's a great question too. Yeah, so right now it's a Midwestern Scouts honor system, I think, for the most part. When a non-PI applies, so if a PI applies for Illinois Compute's application, there's a field that says, you know, who's the PI you're working under, and you can just leave that blank, obviously. But if a grad student or somebody is applying, they will need to fill that filled in. We do check to make sure that if like a grad student applies and they just leave that blank, we do check to make sure like, no, you're not a PI. Who's your PI? And as long as they tell us somebody who is a PI, we're going to trust them that they're giving us, you know, a valid PI, to be honest.
I guess my question is, so that
Because people work underneath multiple PIs.
so that goes only to grad students. Can undergrad students get it? I don't think so.
My understanding currently is no, but if you want to write a ticket in and ask, I implement policy. I am not policy creating, unfortunately. So, but yeah, but that's kind of the situation there.
And it's not backed up.
Correct, not right now.
Yeah, it's just
It is one copy right now, but we'll get into the backup here in a second. Yes.
So if the Google Drive's going away, do you recommend that people perhaps put it into Box?
So.
I know that's not for sharing.
Sure.
But
Understood, yeah.
because the
So
reason
Box,
I'm
there are
asking-
changes coming to Box policies as well. Campus is taking a slower approach. It's based on contracts. University, full transparency, is working through contracts here. And I'm not a part of those conversations either. I'm in meetings where I hear people talk about them. I think campus, like back in like the spring, had to pay Google like $500,000 to like not reduce quotas for people. And that wasn't money that was in someone's budget. We all, you know, look at budgets and the state of them over time. It wasn't sustainable, which is why this kind of drive is.
But for example, I had to be on a webinar for the NSF about STCs. 500 people were attending this thing. And I was not allowed to share the movies because I could only get them there by Google Drive. And NSF said they're not allowed to use Google Drive. So if you want to even communicate with them in Washington, DC, how do you send them a movie efficiently?
Yeah. Right now, that answer is still Box, probably, I think. I don't know what Box, campus is trying to solve their Google Drive problem first, so I'm not sure what quotas and what things look like for Box as it moves forward. I know that it will likely change, but it's over time. They're just focused on Google Drive at this moment.
Okay, thank you.
I have another technical question. Sorry because it's painful.
Yeah.
So let's say I'm a PI and I have a grad student. The grad student has 5 terabytes of very important data. The grad student leaves. Will the PI have access to the data?
Yes.
And what is the policy for permission and all of this? Because
Sure.
I'm sure there's probably, I'm dealing with this all the time, and there's some red tape, you know what?
So part of when we move, so you're using Campus Cluster currently, correct?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, so as we move those allocations into Taiga, we're adopting what something Taiga already has kind of in place where The PI of the allocation has an ACL on every file that is created. So no matter how a user permissions a file, the PI will always have access to read, write, or delete that file. So when they leave, that exact thing can happen. Yep, because that happens frequently. Yes. So the only computer provides is 5 terabytes for free per researcher, like I mentioned. But if additional capacity is needed, Taiga has an internal rate there. That rate is exempt from F&A. So for those of you that are writing grant budgets and are aware of that, we did work with the Office of the Vice Chancellor for Research Institutes. Tiger's rate and Granite's rate you'll see here in the future are F&A exempt. So if you're doing budget planning, it's just that number, nothing else. So that's Taiga. Granite is the other system here. It is our long-term archive. It's based on that technology if you wanted to go look it up. We just did an NSF CC Star where we upgraded the tape system to 18 terabyte tapes. We did some partnership with the Illinois Data Bank. So if you know Heidi Imker over at the library, if you had a chance to work with her, she's a super awesome lady. She was one of my co-PIs on this award to upgrade the technology. And part of that is actually making Illinois Data Bank data allow it to sit on Granite for some of its stuff. Because as Heidi talks about, I think the Illinois Data Bank, which is where like published data sets can go and live in the Illinois Data Bank, they have a limit. I think it's maybe like 1 terabyte per PI or something like. There's some limit. I can't remember. They'll tell you. Because Illinois Data Bank's up in AWS, which is much more expensive to store in S3, and they have some per PI limit. And she would joke when we were on that call, a PI would come to her and say, I have a lot of data. Can you help me store this? And she's like, how much data you got? And they're like, I got 200 gigabytes of data. She's like, oh, okay, I can help you. It's 200 gigabytes. We can handle that. Or the next day, another researcher comes to her and says, I have a lot of data. Can you help me? She's like, well, how much data you got? Like, I got 3 petabytes. And she's like, oh gosh. And so different researchers can have different definitions for what a lot of data is. And so our hope is that when that second type of researcher comes to Heidi with, 2 petabytes of data that they need to keep around or something, she can help kind of foster them. Illinois Data Bank can actually back up into Granite to store that data there. So Granite right now is 36 petabytes, but it can grow now at this point just by adding tapes up to 300 petabytes of capacity. So we've laid down all the common expensive infrastructure, and now it's just expanding by adding tapes.
So how much would it cost to back up my 1 petabyte of data?
So Granite has 10 terabytes available per PI per user. So in theory, if you fit within your active Taiga allocation, you can get double that in the archive tier. You have 1 petabyte. So right now, Granite's internal rate is $15.62 per terabyte per year. Obviously, you can subtract off whatever you get for free there from that petabyte, but that's currently Granite's rate. Internally, that's Yep.
It's probably not very competitive. So, right, I mean, like you were saying, when we write NIH runs, we gotta say how we keep our data. And if you talk about images, then that you sort of get to hundreds of tera, or you get to
Petabytes, yeah.
So
It's
currently, all I can say is we keep multiple hard copies. But so you're saying there's still not a, let's say, competitive or viable.
Because all we need is just a backup, in a way. You don't need to access it all the time. It's just
Correct,
like doomsday backup.
Yeah, so
That's expensive.
Sure. Yeah, I guess I'll put two comments in here on this. Well, 3. I'll make 3 comments. One is that we wish the university would help offset some of these costs. Right now, it's completely cost recovered. That's all the hardware. That is staff time. That is electricity that's used to run it. That is cooling that is used to run it. That is part of the data center floor space bill in the Petascale facility that helps pay BSW budgets and other things like that, that clean that building and all that other stuff. So those rates are fully costed. They're fully loaded costs, which if you're comparing to something that's external to that, it's
It's still cheaper.
Let's get there. So our hope is that Canvas can kind of help with some of those things. This only computes free 10 terabytes is the start, I think, of that we hope to continue to grow there. But that's where that is on the financial side there, unfortunately. Also, one thing with Granite we kind of talked about on like the fixed costs versus incremental costs. At this point, we own that beautiful tape library there on the right. We own a lot of other hardware that goes around Granite. There's perpetual software licenses that are there every year to maintenance it. But if I have to pay SpectraLogic $40,000 a year to keep the robot greased and running, if I store 50 petabytes in that library or I store 200 petabytes in that library, I'm still paying Spectra $40,000 a year. My software licenses are the same. It's a fixed cost no matter how much I store in there. And so part of this also is Granite's rate could be down in the $7 to $8 terabyte per year range if we got up to like 30 or 40 petabytes in that system. It's kind of a chicken and egg problem that we face with a lot of researchers. Like, well, it's too expensive now. But if everyone said, well, let's just do it, it could come out a lot differently on the other end. And so that's one thing we try and plot with Campus. We have Excel charts where we show them as that data in that system grows, here's where that per
But on
terabyte
campus, is that my only option?
for archive.
Or for keeping backup of large data, right?
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, yes. As far as I'm aware, this is currently 2 copies, so your data resides on 2 tapes in this system. In case one tape has a failure, the data isn't gone. The goal of this archive is to be durable. Just a data point, like TAC, down at TAC, they have a system called Ranch, which is their tape archive. It's a single copy of data. So if you only own 1 tape, so they tell you, you put your data in Ranch, but that data in Ranch should be your second copy. It shouldn't be your only copy of this data. Versus with Granite, we kind of are positioning where it can be your only copy of data because it's replicated to multiple pieces of media that are separate from each other that can, each withstand failure.
But the whole thing is sitting in that big room where Blue
Correct.
Waters used to sit, right?
Correct. Yep. Our goal, that is an F3 tornado proof room at this point. But our goal is actually for another library down at like UIS. UI Chicago is a little tight on floor space from what I hear in downtown Chicago. That library is longer than this room. And so, our hope is that we actually put a second, so that 1 copy sits here in Champaign and 1 sits in Springfield, but that's a capital expense. We just haven't had the funding for it to do yet. But that is our hope and our dream there on that one as well. So.
Luigi had a comment on the chat there.
That's Luigi. I'm not necessarily. I work with him, so I can make.
Yeah,
Sorry,
yes.
he talks about ingress costs as well. Yeah, so
That's all included, right?
those are all other expenses. For example, Amazon's cheapest tier of archive is $12 a terabyte per year, which is like $1 a terabyte a month. But there's also egress and ingress charges that do apply to that as well. So getting the data in or out of that archive is there as well. But again, we're trying to get the system to like 20 or 30 petabytes, which would bring its per terabyte rate down to like $9 or $8 per terabyte per year, which would even get us, ignoring egress, beneath AWS's cheapest cost there as well for that. So we're pretty close there. Yes.
Seeing you mentioned cost, I have a quick question. Is it free to consult expert there if you have problems? Correct.
Is it free to what? Sorry?
It's free for the user to ask questions or consult expert there.
Yeah, you can open a ticket, but yeah, just a mouse click. Yeah. So we actually just redid our ticketing system now. So there's help.ncsa.illinois.edu. That will escalate.
That's cool because I recognize AWS charge that and the charge is proportional to the expense.
Ask NCSA about AWS costs. Is that what you're saying?
No. I'm just comparing that to AWS.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Gotcha. Yeah. You can open tickets and ask us questions about this for sure. Yeah. I thought you might have been looking for AWS support or something. No, there's a different group for that. That's not me. That's somebody else. So yeah, so that's Grant's overview there. I'm in Zoom, I'm not PowerPoint. There we go. Yeah, so that was my last slide there. I kind of wanted to touch on Delta and Delta AI because Zan wanted to talk about those. Delta AI is almost ready. I think some of you, maybe at least a couple of you, had early. Yeah, she was on the system already. Early user period. Early user period ends today, actually at 5 p.m. So I'm leaving after this talk to go back and furiously prepare for our NSF acceptance review on Monday for this system. So, so Delta AI is a large GPU system. It's made of Grace Hopper nodes. That's NVIDIA's latest GH200 super chip. Our system has 4 of those per node that are all NVLink connected. And then there is 136 or 132, one of the two, 130 something nodes in the system at this point. Each node has a 200 gigabit NIC on each Grace Hopper. So each Grace Hopper has its own network interface that allows it to inject and receive data from the network. And so that system is there. It's accompanied by right now about 3.5 petabytes of NVMe storage and 6-7 petabytes of disk-based storage. And that storage actually is common across both Delta and Delta AI. So so that system is there. It's another center in the NSF portfolio, namely TAC, has deployed their own Grace Hopper system. That is a single Grace Hopper per node. So for codes, I was just talking to you about this during the pre-lecture talk. If you have code that scales well within a node, that's why we did Delta AI with 4 GPUs per node, so that in TAC, if you wanted to use more than 1 GPU, you have to go outside the node, which can be sometimes more challenging for PyTorch and other applications to scale out those ways, or you have to do a lot more configuring to make them work that way. Our goal is to give bigger single node scaling for applications, which is why we went with the quad GPU architecture in that system for folks whose codes can't scale out of a single GPU, or single node, sorry. So that's available for researchers as well. Taiga underpins /projects on there. And a big goal with this here, kind of alluding back to that slide here is that fundamentally, the nice part about this is that because Taiga is connected everywhere, if you're generating data on campus cluster, for example, and you want to work with that data on a job on Delta allocation or Delta AI allocation that you have, the data is instantly available in both places. It's as if it were one thing. So slash projects on both Delta and Delta AI is Taiga based, but you also see like a raw amount of slash Taiga at the top level. You'll be able to traverse down into your data that's available on campus cluster and access it in both places. And if you spin up a VM in Radiant, maybe to spin up like a web portal in front of your data set, for example, and we can export your project space into your Radiant VM, and it's available in all those places simultaneously. It goes back to that goal of data being available everywhere for everybody at any time. Taiga is, like I said, exported via NFS and Samba, so you can edit your job script on a workstation, run that job on Delta, view that data immediately on campus cluster, for example, things like that. That's that whole lack of data movement, that different views of data accessibility that we kind of talked about there as well. So, so data stored on Taiga will be available in all these different compute platforms as well. So we're very tightly integrated there, and that was the goal behind Taiga and why we kind of designed it the way we did. So, yeah, I think that's all my predefined stuff. You guys have been good about asking questions already, but
Yeah,
you can
thank
definitely
you
open
very
the floor to
much.
questions. Yes.
Yeah, so I have a question about the essentially the sharing of data on Taiga.
Mhm.
So what does that interface look like if you wanted to say share any type of data set with, like you said, the whole world? Do they have to request an NCSA account and then command line in or something, or is there a more GUI-like interface?
Sure. There's one. Oh, I'm thinking two. There's two ways right now to do that. There's a third that we're working on. So the first one is Globus shared collections. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Globus or not. Globus is a way to it's initially there to transfer data between sites. It's like a big thing where you have like a file explorer up in your web browser.
Okay.
You can see the parallel. You can see Taiga and NCSA, and you can see like NERSC. If you compute NERSC, they have a big file system in NERSC, and you can say, I want to move this folder to NERSC. You select that folder, and then you hit a big blue arrow, and it just parallelizes the transfer, and you can walk away, close your browser, throw your laptop into the ocean, and it's going to transfer the data over to NERSC for you. But also you can create what are called virtual collections on there, and then anybody with a Globus account can access that data. And Globus federates identity. So if you were working with somebody at University of Nebraska-Lincoln, for example, just randomly, they would log into globus.org with their University of Nebraska-Lincoln credentials, and then they could see your data set there. They don't have to go create an NCSA or Illinois account. You don't have to sponsor anybody. It's just there in Globus, and they can download it that way. They can't open the file in the web browser, but they can click on it and download it, or things like that. There's also S3 that we brought to Taiga. So if people like to do S3 tools like rclone or CyberDuck, or Windows has its equivalents like FileZilla or things, anything that can talk S3, any client, there's a bunch of them out there. S3 is another way that we have available now to get data in and out of Taiga. And then we're also working on a web, in light of this Google Drive and Box transition that we talked about, we're working on kind of a web front end for these things, so people can kind of do things kind of Box-like. What that all entails and looks like and what features are there is still under development at this time. We're trying to get that in place as well. Web stuff is tricky because a lot of times a lot of the tools that are out there will run as the Apache user, the Nginx user, and the data will get owned by the Apache or Nginx user, which is not what we want. It needs to be owned by the person who uploaded it and things like that. So there's a lot of complications that come into that web interface, but we're trying to work on that right now. So right now, Globus, S3, and then soon that web front end.
Okay. Yeah. No, I was just thinking about it because in data availability statements for papers, I was thinking, okay, am I going to have to start writing a full README on how to do this procedure?
Oh, sure,
or
yeah.
is it still going to be as simple as
you put them in an S3 bucket and get credentials out or whatever like that?
Yeah.
Read-only credentials out to S3 bucket. I guess another awesome method too, fourth method. Currently, there's those Radiant VMs. So if there's we're just going to talk about Clouder here. If you had your data behind Clouder, you could do it that way too. But even if you want to get a Radiant VM and state up any web server, or if there's a tool that your science domain uses to visualize or show data on your web browser, you can stand up a Radiant VM on a Radiant allocation. You mount that data set and you can expose it to the world over that as well. So that's another option depending on what exactly you're doing. So, yeah.
Okay, well then, thank you.